Hey, you probably already know that the basics of health, wellness, and longevity start at the cellular level. If we take good care of ourselves, then we can live a long and healthy life and fight off colds, viruses, infections, as well as disease. On this podcast, I interviewed Dr. Bill Rawls, and he's just written a new book on cellular wellness. He shares how to use the power of natural herbs to boost cellular wellness for yourself. You got to check out this fantastic interview on how to use herbs to improve your cellular health and wellness. If you're looking to get thicker, fuller, and stronger hair, make sure to check out fullyvital.com. The team has come up with 4 unique ways to stimulate the hair follicles to get them to start regrowing again. So to get thicker and fuller and stronger hair using vegan and 100% natural products, go to fullyvital.com and use the code anti-aging-hacks for 15% off. Are you enjoying the videos on this channel? Then make sure to hit the subscribe button down below so you can get notified when we release new episodes. Our goal on this channel is to help you look and feel younger and also reverse your aging so that you can live your best life. So make sure to hit the subscribe button down below so you can get notified when we release new episodes. With that said, let's get right on with the podcast. Hello and welcome back to the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Bill Rawls, who is a 4th-generation physician and has dedicated his life to medicine. But when faced with a personal health crisis in his late 40s with Lyme disease, everything changed for him. In his quest to regain his health, Dr. Rawls was confronted with the limitations of conventional medicine and knew he had to find his own path to restore wellness. For the past 15 years, he's extensively studied the science behind herbal therapies and new sustainable approaches for protecting health. Today, Dr. Rawls shares the revelations that have helped him and thousands of others reclaim their lives. Dr. Rawls is a leading expert in integrative health and medical director of Vital Plan, a holistic health and herbal supplement company in Raleigh, North Carolina. He is a best-selling author of Unlocking Lyme, and his most recent book is called The Cellular Wellness Solution. Tap into your full health potential with the science-backed power of herbs. With that said, Dr. Rawls, welcome to the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, I've been reading your book and I'm super excited to get deeper into it and ask you some more questions. And it's a long book. I was up till late reading it last night, and so I've got a lot of questions. But before we do that, please give the listeners your background, how you got into the medical practice, and how you became an expert in herbs.
Yeah, well, that was by accident for sure. It's as you read my bio, I was trained as a physician. There were other physicians in my family, and it seemed like the right thing to do. Went into obstetrics and gynecology because it was dealing more with the wellness side of healthcare as opposed to the chronic illness side. Mm-hmm. But it was really very demanding. I mean, practicing obstetrics and gynecology 30 years ago, I was on call every second to third night. Right. And, being active in the community, keeping up with my kids, and this really rigorous practice, what got shorted was sleep. And I was basically sleep deprived for 20 years, and it eventually caught up with me. Mm-hmm. And I ended up losing my health, and basically just everything fell apart. Initially, I identified with fibromyalgia, but like many people with fibromyalgia, finally really worked hard, found the microbes associated with Lyme disease, and it was like, yes, finally a diagnosis, something I can treat, take some antibiotics, I'll be fine. And it didn't work. I got worse instead of better. And because there was nothing else out there, I ended up turning to herbal therapy. Mm-hmm. I read a book called Healing Lyme by a guy named Stephen Booner that laid out an herbal protocol, and I embraced it and started getting my health back within several months. But it was kind of an up and down journey. I had to change my diet, had to stop doing that terrible night call, had to rebuild my body, but found that the herbs were really important for that. And along the way, I treated the herbs like therapy. You take the herbs, you get better, and then you stop the herbs because that's your treatment. And every time I'd do that, some stress would come along and I'd get knocked back down. And finally, it was kind of like, I feel better while I'm on the herbs. They're really making me feel great. I'm just going to keep taking them. And so I did. And I've been taking herbs for a decade and a half, every single day. And I watch my diet, my sleep, and I exercise regularly and all of those things. But I take those herbs every day. And I think that's given me advantages because at age 65, I'm not aging like other people. Not only did I get everything back, but my body is much more resilient than it's ever been. I recover from things very quickly. My healing capacity is very high. And so part of that decade and a half journey is understanding what the herbs were doing and why they were so remarkably important that they should be front and center in everything that we're doing when we think about health and wellness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love this. And you're using the power of nature to help heal and nurture your body. And of course, we'll get into a lot of this as we go through the interview. How long did you actually study these herbs for your condition, and then in general to improve your health from a day-to-day basis, not only just from the problems that you had, but also just general wellness moving forward?
Well, that's been just an ongoing thing for 15 plus years now. That I when I first read this book, I didn't have any other options. I was still had a medical practice. I had to have income. I hadn't declared disability. I couldn't travel all over the country and go to other doctors that might be experts. And it was more just, hey, this has to work for me because I have to put my kids through college. I have to do these things. And so I was, it was just hope and a prayer that they actually would work. Though I'll have to say that my medical education had given me biases that probably they wouldn't. So I didn't have high expectations. And when things started getting better, it was like, wow, something's going on here. And so the first some years was just really exploring herbs from that traditional point of view. So I started studying traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, the different herbal traditions around the world. But that's not really how my brain was trained to work. I mean, I was trained in science, and those things are pre-science. They're very valuable, don't get me wrong, but they were all observational. People didn't know about the inner chemistry and inner workings of cellular functions in the body when they were using these things. So it was more just matching herbs to particular symptoms or conditions. And I really wanted to understand herbs from a different level, from a Western science level, something that made sense to me and where I came from. So I started digging for that information. And, 30 years ago, there wasn't much. But over the past 20 years since the internet, there has just been an explosion of research on herbs around the world. So I was just eating this up and building theories of why do we get ill? What's happening? What's going on inside the body? And how are these herbs affecting those processes that might help us? And my conclusion is that a lot of things we do in medical therapies, they can reduce symptoms, they can stabilize illness, they can prevent progression of illness, but what they don't do is directly promote healing. And what I discovered was that herbs, how they worked at that cellular level, they actually promoted healing. And that's the differentiator that I think is just fantastic, that we all ought to be tapping into.
Yeah, totally. Okay, love that. Are you still practicing as a physician right now, Dr. Rawls?
I gave up my medical practice because trying to practice within the system and insurance, it just doesn't work for how I work, for how I think. So I'm like outside the box of thinking about chronic illness and how I apply these things. And So I feel like my energies are best served creating programs, writing books, writing information, doing podcasts, getting this information out there. When I was researching the book, I happened upon a study that was evaluating people overcoming chronic illness. And very interestingly, they came to the conclusion that 90% of overcoming any chronic illness is self-care. So it's only like 10% or less that we're actually doing in the healthcare system. And I felt like I kind of served my best in doing that and being locked into that system, the coding systems where you had to have a diagnosis and, all the different kinds of things to get paid. It just didn't work. So if I can help people figure out that 90% and recognize how valuable herbs are in that, then I think that's where my best value is now.
Okay, now that makes sense. And like you said, the inside the box thinking is not taking us very far. We're not seeing vibrant, healthy individuals in their later stages of life, especially over 70. And so things need to change. And I'm so glad that integrative and holistic physicians are actually making strides. And we've got tons of scientific studies now, which are helping us understand how these herbs and some of these Eastern Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine actually works inside the body. So now we have data behind it. So it's a very interesting time and a great time to be alive. And of course, the biotech is doing its thing, and hopefully we'll make some big strides there as well. But if you got to get the basics down with what's already available to us, and that's what makes me excited about this interview. Okay, so let's get into cellular wellness. That's the topic of your book, and you explore that in depth. And I've been reading your book, as I said. So explain how you define cellular wellness to the audience, Dr. Rawls.
Yeah, it's not how we normally think about things. You and I are looking at each other. We think about each other as a whole, the whole body, and we compartmentalize that into we've got liver and heart and brain and all these different functions, and that's how our medical system is designed up. We've got cardiologists and pulmonologists and gynecologists and neurosurgeons, and so we compartmentalize everything, and it kind of treats the body like it was a car. But it's not. So if you want to understand anything, break it down to its smallest functional unit. And in any living creature, including the human body, that is a living cell. And when you take everything down to the cellular level, it changes your understanding. It changes the playing field completely. So we are a composite of trillions of cells. Anything that happens in the body, whether that is your heart beating, your brain firing impulses, or your thyroid gland producing hormone, it's all done by cells. Every single thing in the body is done by cells. So when we think about a car is a unit. A cell phone is a unit. A 747 is a unit. And if something breaks in that unit, it's pretty much done until you go in and repair that thing and fix it. Then it can work again. Our body, the beauty of us being cells is that our heart isn't a unit. It's a composite of billions of cells. And cells can wear out and you can replace cells. So your heart keeps right on beating and everything keeps working. Another thing about cells that's really remarkable is cells have the ability to recover from stress. They can repair internal damage. Now, there are limits on that. As cells run out of energy, they run out of the ability to restore themselves. But the ability of cells to recover from stress, to recover from injury, is what healing is. So that separates us from any kind of mechanical device. Just the fact that, we're made of cells and we can lose cells, and typically we do. So what aging is, the definition of aging is loss of functional cells. So we start out at age 20, that's when we have our peak cells. Our cells are brand spanking new, and we have 5 to 10 times more cells than we need to actually survive. So through life, we gradually lose functional cells, and our cells lose functionability. That's what aging is. if you stress your cells with bad food, bad diet, staying up all night, all of these different things, toxin exposure, being sedentary, then you accelerate your cell loss as you go through life. So, so taking care of your cells is fundamentally what healthy aging is all about. But it's also avoiding illness. So what illness is when cells are chronically stressed and they can't recover from stress. So when cells are stressed, they can't do their function. So we, as our unit, our body, doesn't work as well. And because we have different cells in the body, illness can happen in a lot of different ways. Mm-hmm. But that's basically, in a nutshell, what's going on. And so when you look at, well, how do we enhance that? How do we improve it? It's taking care of cells. And if you create conditions, and this is where it gets simple. If you create conditions inside the body that cells can take care of themselves, for whether you're taking care of one cell, you're taking care of all the cells, then your body is going to take care of itself. And that's what I found. So when I took the pressures off, and taking herbs supports that, that's when I started getting better. And my body, I often made the observation when I was a physician, it didn't matter how good my choice of drugs were or how accurate my surgical skills were. If the patient's body had lost the ability to heal, things weren't going to go well.
Right.
So it's all about healing at the cellular level.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's great. In your book, you talk about some of the regular insults that our cells have to endure. And you mentioned some of them just now, which is poor diet, you have mental stress, you have physical stress. And the two other ones that you also mentioned are toxic environment and microbial stress. So I want to ask you a couple of questions around both of those. Let's start maybe with the toxic environment. What's happening around us that's so toxic to us these days compared to a long time ago, and how is that impacting our cellular health?
It's when you look at what our cells are adapted to, we're adapted to an environment that hardly exists any longer. We've changed our environment so much in the past 100 years that our cells are struggling because of all the toxic substances. So what a toxic substance does, why a substance is harmful to us, is it basically gets stuck inside of our cells and inhibits functions in some way. So it basically is like a ball and chain in the cell. It keeps it from working well. The cell can't run smoothly. It's kind of like putting bad gas in your car. That if you inhibit the functions inside the cell, and the cell is constantly trying to expel these things, but if it just keeps coming at us. So there was a lot of stuff in the environment that wasn't there 100 years ago. There are literally several 100,000 different chemicals that have been created. Most of it is from petroleum. Mm-hmm. So that is, in a nutshell, a big part of what's going on. Is when you look at petroleum, it comes from organic plant matter, right? So petroleum comes from algae and plants in the ocean that were compressed. Coal comes from plant matter on the earth that was compressed for millions of years. So if you went back and you ate that plant matter that was going to become petroleum, it wouldn't hurt you. In fact, it'd be really good for you. But what happened over millions of years of pressure is we distorted those organic chemicals into forms that aren't compatible with biological life any longer. Mm-hmm. And that's true with both petroleum, natural gas, and coal. And with coal, we pushed all kinds of heavy metals like mercury and cadmium and all of these heavy metals that were in the earth. We pushed that into this organic matter. So when we burn coal, we release these chemicals and we release these heavy metals out into the atmosphere. So they end up in the air, in the rain, and then in small streams and in our food supply. Petroleum, burning petroleum, using petroleum, and building out plastics and all of these kinds of things. So it's like petroleum is one of the best things that ever happened to us, because it allowed us to do all these cool things, but it's also one of the worst. And you have to respect that, that all these chemicals we've released, when they get into living organisms, they inhibit cellular functions. And that's a real problem. A lot of people aren't paying attention to this, but amphibian populations worldwide have dropped because they're very sensitive to that. Mm-hmm. But even more interesting is that our insect populations are dropping. Now, part of that is because we're using a lot of insecticides to kill off mosquitoes and ticks and a lot of other things. But part of it is just all the chemicals we're dumping in the environment. Mm-hmm. I read a National Geographic article several years ago that researchers over a 30-year period noted an 80% drop in many insect populations, including a lot of the pollinators that pollinate our food. Mm-hmm. So it's using these things responsibly. That's the answer, not necessarily eliminating them, but using them responsibly. And on the same side, trying to prevent incorporating those things into our body. So it's pretty simple, really. I mean, we breathe them in, we consume them as liquid or food, or we get them through our skin. So you can filter your water, you can buy organic food, and you don't have to buy everything organic, but just more emphasis on organic, and just being careful with skin products that we use natural skin products. A little bit more expensive, but they are so much safer to use on your hair, your skin, everything. And then, filters inside your home, and trying to live in a place that has relatively clean air.
Yeah, fantastic tips. And we've talked about this in the past. And these are so many factors that once you start to understand what's going on, it's not that difficult to alter your life in little pieces so that you become more aware of what these things are and stepping away from them. For example, you said cleaner air. You can have air filters in your home, or just move away from the center of the city, just a little bit to the burbs, so you're away from the highway smoke and whatnot. Live away from factories, drink filtered water. That's easy to do, right? And then the average woman uses 12 products before she leaves the home in the morning. So just look at those products and see if there's phthalates, benzoates, some of these chemicals, parabens that are proven to cause harm, and use as natural products as you can, as Dr. Rawls is saying. It'll take you a few months, but once you get to this step, then you will have relieved so much of the toxic burden that's just coming into your life for no reason. Okay, let's talk about the next item on your list, which is microbes. And I learned some interesting things about microbes in your book, in that once these microbes are everywhere, they come in through, the orifices in our body, and or the food that we eat, and or from our skin, and if we have cuts in our skin as well. And so what you're saying, Dr. Bill, is that these microbes can get embedded in tissues, and for the most part, the immune system can take care of them. It's not a big deal. But as we get older, then they can get the upper hand and really cause havoc in our bodies. So please explain that concept of microbes and how they dysregulate our immune system and our bodies.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a brief overview here, but this is a really deep topic, and one that I'm deeply immersed in and interested in and passionate about right now, because as this information comes out, it is going to completely change everything we know about wellness and chronic illness. It is. And I started looking at this with Lyme disease because I identified with Lyme disease. I found some of those microbes, and really studying the microbes associated with Lyme disease, They're low-grade pathogens. They don't typically kill people at the initial infection. In fact, most people don't even know they've gotten it. People don't have symptoms most of the time. But then I found, well, it's not just this Borrelia microbe with Lyme disease. There's Bartonella and Rickettsia and chlamydia and mycoplasma. And it's like all these people have co-infections. And it's like, well, what's all this coming from? And I found that things that people were identifying as co-infections they didn't get from ticks. They probably picked up as kids, like mycoplasma and chlamydia and Epstein-Barr virus. And it's like, what's going on here? And I kept digging deeper and deeper, and it got more and more fascinating. And where I am now, I'm actually in the middle of preparing a webinar on this topic because it's so fascinating. But what's emerging is this idea. Scientists are identifying something they're calling the dormant blood and tissue microbiome. And we all know about our microbiome and our gut and our skin, and we know about that we all carry microbes, right? We carry bacteria. We're loaded with bacteria in our gut. But technically, those microbes, those bacteria and viruses and fungi, and there's a lot of stuff in there, they're separated from our tissues. We have to keep them contained inside the gut or out on our skin. Because when it comes right down to it, what microbes want is food. Everything's got to survive. Everything's got to eat. And they need nutrients. They need resources. And on our skin, they can live off of oils that are out on our skin that we secrete just to lubricate the skin. In our gut, they live off of food material that we don't consume. But it turns out our tissues, our cells are really good nutrient sources. So anything living is food for something else. We're potentially food for a lot of different kinds of microbes. So we have microbes that are inside of us, and they're actually trying to get across those spaces. Some of them are. So the things that we call normal flora, they're the good guys, what we call the good guys. They could secrete substances that suppress potential pathogens, things that could do us harm. So that's kind of our first line of defense. That second line is these barriers, the intestinal lining. Turns out, though, those barriers aren't as good as we might hope. That bacteria, so this is new science as of within the past 5 or so years, there have been I was able to find 12 independent studies that they found bacteria from the gut, from the skin, from our sinuses, from our gums, inside the bloodstream in healthy people. Wow. Inside the bloodstream in healthy people, all kinds of different kinds of microbes. And when we start looking deeper, we find that, yes, our brain has microbes. And so we have all of these things. So things are crossing over from, it turns out that our bloodstream is more like a freeway, and our tissues do have microbes. So our immune system has the job of taking care of all that, protecting us from these things coming across, or things that are coming from the outside, trying to get inside our body that we call infections. Mm-hmm. So these things are happening all the time. Our immune system is constantly patrolling and trying to keep these things down, but some get through. Some get through. Sometimes we know about it. Sometimes we don't. That this thing is trickling across, and what they're trying to do is get to cells. So it turns out that all the bacteria and viruses and protozoa that we have to deal with have the capacity to live inside cells of the body. But what's pretty new information is they also have the ability to become dormant inside our cells. So if they can reach cells, it turns out that it's not just our immune system that defends us from microbes. Our cells can defend themselves. A healthy cell can expel or destroy microbes that invade the cell. Mm-hmm. So they use a process called autophagy, which is also the process that the cell uses to renew itself, but it can kill microbes with that. So if all of our cells are healthy, we're not exposed to toxins, we're eating well, we're getting lots of sleep, then our cells can take care of that microbe assault that's kind of going on all the time. But sometimes what happens is, the microbes don't win, the cell doesn't win, and the microbe just becomes dormant inside the cell. And that's a fascinating area of science, that they're finding that we do have dormant microbes inside our red blood cells, our white blood cells, and our tissues, and our brain and tissues, our heart, tissues throughout our body. So you can have these things. You start picking them up the day you start that you come out of your mother's womb, and maybe even before. There's some studies I'm studying now suggesting that microbes are crossing even before we're born from the mother. Wow. And we pick these things up when we put stuff in our mouths, when we go to daycare, all these viruses and bacteria, and some of them become dormant, and you go through life and you're fine. But then you start aging, and you're gone for years of eating bad food and not sleeping at night, and all of these things. You weaken the cells of your body, and these dormant microbes start to reactivate. And so your body switches from this environment that favors cellular health to one that favors microbe growth, and bacteria start breaking down cells. And this isn't in one place, it's throughout the body. So scientists are writing articles suggesting that this is a mechanism for chronic illness. And not just one, but possibly all chronic illnesses. It's been shown to be associated with diabetes, atherosclerosis, Parkinson's, dementia, everything. And we're not addressing that with conventional medicine because we don't have any drugs that will fix this. Antibiotics won't touch it. They don't get in the cells, and they disrupt our normal flora. But herbs do. And that's what's so fascinating. And that is the key to understanding why I got well.
Okay. And I know you have a history with fibromyalgia and Lyme disease in particular, and you're able to get well. And that's a very hard challenge or health condition that people have to spend sometimes years trying to figure out. And so, that's really great. So what you're saying, Dr. Rawls, is that these microbes, of course, we know they're inside our bodies, but they can go into cells and tissues and become dormant, meaning they still need to eat food, right? So you're saying they're not reproducing, but they can just hang around in the cell, and the cell won't kill them even when it's healthy, and they'll hang around tissues for a while until our body weakens, and then they can get the upper hand.
This is still emergent science. There's still a lot we don't know, but what they're suggesting is that it basically goes into a stasis, that it's not dead, but it's not alive either. It's not using up the cellular resources. Cells are functioning perfectly normal with these microbes in place. You have to remember that a bacteria is like 1,000 times smaller than a cell. So you could have a bunch of bacteria in a cell. There's even some suggestions with some authors are suggesting that possibly there's a symbiotic relationship, that some of our cells actually need this to function properly. We've been evolving with microbes since the very beginning of time. So this relationship we have is much more complex than I think we can even imagine at this point. But we're living in a different world. The microbes have always been there. But now, look at us. Look at the kind of food we're eating, which is really having a horrible effect on our cells. All these toxins that we're exposed to, that is on an everyday basis for every person on the planet. We don't move like we used to, and we're not moving blood, and we don't sleep. Sleep is when our cells have time to recover, and we're not doing that anymore. The average American sleeps 6.5 hours or less. It's just not enough. So we're not getting good sleep. We're not getting our downtime. So that creates an environment of chronic cellular stress and weakens our cells. And it just makes it ripe for whatever we picked up through life to activate.
Wow.
So when you look at this thing, it's just a perfect explanation of chronic illness. We have a lot of different kinds of chronic illness because cells can be stressed in different ways. Everybody picks up different microbes, and different microbes can act in different ways in the body. Mm-hmm. And you put all of that together, and so people have different breakdown of different cells in the body. So we have different illnesses. But that makes it really complicated when you look at, the thousands and thousands upon thousands of diagnoses we have. But if you take it back to, okay, what can we do about the cellular stress and get these microbes dormant again, mm-hmm. then it simplifies everything, because you don't have to precisely treat a diagnosis. You treat the causes of the illness, and it puts you on a completely different playing field. And it's not that we should throw everything out the window. I think our drugs and medical therapies are very important for stabilizing illness and reducing symptoms, especially in the early stages. And when somebody does develop cancer, I don't think there are any herbs out there that actually adequately kill the cancer cells.
Right.
But we're not doing anything to prevent cancer.
True.
And cancer, the WHO recently defined cancer as a worldwide epidemic. It's growing every year because we're not doing anything to protect ourselves. So sometime we don't have time today, we can get into the connection between microbes and cancer very specifically, which is very fascinating.
Yeah. Interesting. Cancer, I believe, is the number one killer of people worldwide, except in the United States, where heart disease is the number one killer, and cancer is a very, very close second. It's right neck and neck up there. Yep. Okay, so one last thing on microbes, and this is a very interesting topic, by the way. You mentioned in your book that there may be a link between the microbes and also autoimmunity, and we're seeing a lot more autoimmune conditions in the recent past than ever before. And so you're saying that because the normal cells, as your immune system is attacking some of these microbes or other challenges in the cell, or cells that are dysregulated, the normal cells can get caught in the crossfire. Is that correct?
Exactly. I mean, think about it, so except that we have dormant microbes in our cells, viruses, bacteria, protozoa, everybody, all living creatures, it turns out, have some of these. So you weaken your cells with bad food and chronic stress and toxic substances, and the cells get weak. The microbes reactivate and emerge, and they start infecting other cells. Well, the body's reaction to that, the only thing it can do is it sends in the immune system to kill those cells, and it ends up making antibodies to normal cells too. So it absolutely, I don't think you can explain autoimmunity without considering that microbe factor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting hypothesis. Would love to dive deeper into it at a future date. Okay, let's talk about, so we talked about the factors that are causing chronic illnesses, and you've mentioned them over and over again. What about improving ourselves, and how do we stay as young as possible from a cellular wellness standpoint? What are the things we can do to make sure the cells are as healthy as possible?
Sure. Well, we've talked about a few of them. With I look at it in several areas. First, diet. The big thing, the biggest insult that people are making to their body and their cells is eating way too much carbohydrate. And I don't necessarily think everybody needs to go ketogenic, but we do need to cut our carbs back. I try to live on 150 grams or less carbohydrates a day. You have to be under 75 grams to be ketogenic. In other words, your body is functioning off of fat. And I find that life is a little more comfortable with a little bit of carbohydrate in it. But if I can keep it down below 150, that is really helping to protect my cells. And we can measure that with a test called hemoglobin A1C that measures a process of glycation. Glycation is the destructive process of carbohydrates and what they do to the cells. So I found that I can keep my hemoglobin A1C in the low 5 point. It's, my last one was 5.3, which is pretty comfortable. Most people are around 6. That's not good. And just by keeping it below 150. I try to eat more vegetables than anything else. It's a tall order for a lot of people. So if you're cutting your carbs back, a lot of people tend to eat too much meat. And, meat isn't good for a lot of reasons. Some meat, as a protein source, I think is fine, but reducing red meat, more fish and poultry. And I try to eat more vegetables than anything else. My daily quota, I try to get them in somehow. It's like I made a smoothie this morning, had blueberries, couple of pieces of banana just for a little sweet, but it had celery and cucumber and salad greens in there too, and it was half that. But it was a good smoothie because the blueberries and everything give it some flavor, and I put some like mushroom powders and stuff in there too. It's good stuff. But, every meal I try to do that is get those vegetables in there, celeries and cucumbers for snacks and with hummus and things like that. So that diet, we talked about how to reduce your toxin load. We're not going to change the environment of the earth anytime soon, but we can protect ourselves. That's important. Stress is a big one, and that was a big one for me, is just, sometimes you've got to work your life. And it took me years to get a life where I was allowing time to sleep. And, I try to get that 7 or 8 hours, 7.5 or 8 hours every night, and just doing things during the day to reduce my stress load. I try to walk a minimum of 3 miles a day. That's my minimum. I got up this morning and we have a little saltwater creek that we're connected to. And I went up and paddleboarded for 45 minutes, before this, because I had a little extra time there. So I try to fit in those things wherever I can. And then that extra protection, whatever efforts you make are going to be compounded by the herbs. Because I found, what we're doing with the herbs. And when we talk about herbs, that's a pretty broad category. There's certainly herbs that have drug-like properties. But here I'm talking about herbs that really don't have drug-like properties, that are more used for healing and promoting healing. And what the herbs are doing is protecting cells. So all plants have antimicrobial properties. All plants are, they have this chemical defense and regulatory system to protect their cells from microbes and free radicals and radiation and all the things that we are exposed to, that our cells are exposed to. So when we take an herb, we're taking a plant that has been found to be compatible with human biochemistry. We've been taking herbs for thousands of years, maybe even longer. So these plants, we're basically taking in the plant's chemical and regulatory defense system. So it's not like a chemical, it's systems. It's the innate intelligence of the plant. So we're boosting our cellular defenses against microbes and free radicals and toxic substances with these chemical defenses of the plant. So it just accentuates every effort that you make. And you can't get that from food anymore, because our foods have been cultivated so much that they don't have these protective chemical properties in them to the degree that herbs do. So taking herbs every day just makes a lot of sense.
And you've got in your book, you've got these ratings for herbs, where it's one rating is super safe to take every single day for most people. The other ones are a little bit more cautionary, or the yellow rating. And then third, you should definitely work with a practitioner or herbologist or herbal expert to take those. So if I was to ask you, what are some of the typical common herbs that everybody can and should be taking to maintain cellular wellness every single day? Which one would those be? Which ones?
All right. Well, I have my list. I mean, and these are herbs that I do take every day. There are a lot of herbs that fit into this category, but, I have some favorites. And it's not one herb. I think that's important, that when you look at a plant, the chemistry of the plant and the problems it's solving with that chemistry are going to be reflected by stresses in the plant's environment. What microbes, what kind of toxic substances are in that environment. So when you take plants from different places and have different characteristics, you get this synergy that is greater than any one individual herb. So combining herbs, typically most herbal formulas contain anywhere from 5 to a dozen different herbs. So I certainly have my list of everyday herbs, and these are herbs that I specifically chose because they have a low potential for having any kind of drug-like effects, side effects, or any negative reactions. So my top one is rhodiola. Rhodiola is a favorite herb. It's defined as an adaptogen. It's from Siberia. But interestingly, they found it in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina. So we find that different plants have relatives all over the earth. So even though you may be choosing an herb from China because of the studies, you can often find a plant in North America or Europe or wherever that's very similar to that. So rhodiola, it typically grows in a harsh, cold environment. So its chemistry is very good for helping us adapt to physical and mental stresses. It neutralizes some of those factors that affect our cells and helps balance our hormones to neutralize some of those stress effects. So it helps us adapt to physical stress. It enhances oxygenation of tissues, so it helps our cells adapt to all kinds of physical stresses. It was typically used in people that were working under harsh conditions. Second to that, I like reishi, which is actually a mushroom. So all of our herbs aren't plants. We do include some herbs that we define as medicinal mushrooms. Reishi, if you go hiking in the woods somewhere and you see a mushroom on the side of a tree, what we call a shelf mushroom that kind of looks like a rainbow with rust colors in it, that's a species of reishi, and they're all good. Be careful though. I wouldn't just grab any mushroom off of any tree. You do have to know what you're doing. But reishi, the Asian version, has been studied in Japan, and it has some of the most potent anti-cancer chemicals known. It also has antiviral properties and antibacterial properties. So, it helps balance hormones, protect cells. Great for the liver, great for the cardiovascular system. Turmeric, everybody knows that one from India. And it is the yellow color in the curries in India. People in India consume about a gram of turmeric a day. And it is felt to be the reason why people in India have such a low rate of cancer and Alzheimer's. It's a wonderful anti-inflammatory. It does have some antimicrobial properties. Another herb from India, Gotu kola, is taken for protecting the brain. So we want to protect different organs. We want to protect the heart. We want to protect the brain. So all herbs are going to protect all cells in the body, but their characteristics may be such that for different reasons, they may protect brain cells better than some other cells. So it's one we want to incorporate. I recently found that Gotu kola grows naturally along the coast of the Carolinas, which was a real surprise. We don't know if it was implanted there and it's an invasive, or whether it just is a species that's really close. So interesting. Milk thistle, more specific for the liver. We all need liver protection. All these toxic substances we're exposed to, we burn out our livers. 25% of people in America have fatty liver, and most people don't know it. It's hard to diagnose. But you burn out your liver cells and it replaces with fat cells. And as we do that, our ability to process toxins, it goes away, and our cholesterol starts climbing because we're not affecting our we're affecting our ability to manage cholesterol properly when we lose liver cells. Really interestingly, I've been taking milk thistle for about 15 or so years now. My cholesterol was better last year than it was when I was in my 40s.
Wow.
Part of that is diet and how I go about life, but I have to think it's probably because I'm protecting my liver too. Milk thistle actually causes regeneration of liver cells.
Very cool.
One I put on my list is an herb called shilajit, which doesn't come from a specific plant. It's kind of an interesting substance, and there's a specific reason why I add it. It is plant material that's been fermented with soil bacteria that oozes out of rocks. It can be found on rocks in the Himalayas. The reason to add it is it has a really rich phytochemistry, but the soil bacteria create something called fulvic acid and humic acid, which we found are really good for gut functions, and they help support reproductive functions, testosterone, that sort of thing. But we used to eat on the ground, right? We got soil and soil bacteria in our food. We don't do that anymore. And so I feel like that's something missing that we don't have in our diet, and most of the herbs aren't replacing. So that shilajit is adding something that was missing. Now you have to use a really pure version of it. That's something that has been tested to make sure that, it hasn't been contaminated with heavy metals and that sort of thing. But shilajit is an interesting substance. So there are others. I take hawthorn for my heart, and maritime pine barks of plants are just really loaded with antioxidants. So those are some other things that I like too.
Yeah, that's a great list. Thank you for sharing those. Now, you like herbs over specific nutrients. Is it because there's more phytochemicals and the combined chemistry of the entire herb, and even a mixture of herbs, is way better than just a single nutrient?
I think that's something that I wasn't clear on in the beginning, and I try to, now that I understand the difference. Everybody tends to put nutrients, vitamins, coenzyme Q10, glutathione, or L-carnitine in the same category as herbs, and they're as different as apples and oranges. They're not the same. So nutrients are substances that cells need to function. They're basically the raw material for the cellular functions, or they're the raw material for cells to replace parts and build new parts, build new mitochondria. So nutrients are substances that are basically the building blocks for cells to use to do their work. Herbs are not good sources of nutrients. We need nutrients, and most of our nutrients are best obtained from food. Some supplements are so reasonable in certain indications, but herbs aren't a good source of nutrients. So what we're looking for in the herbs, we're specifically extracting the phytochemicals. So when we take an herbal extract in a capsule or a tincture, we're not getting any nutrients from it. So the nutritive value of herbs is really, really low. So we would, so we're looking to our food to get our nutrients, our herbs to get that phytochemical protection. But here's an interesting way to think about it. If our cells are chronically stressed, they work harder. And if they're working harder, that nutrient demand goes way up. We're pushing our mitochondria faster and harder. We're burning out mitochondrial parts. We're burning out cellular parts. So the demands of the cells for nutrients go way up. And replacing some of those nutrients is like I do recommend a lot of nutrient replacements in people with chronic illness. But when you look at what the herbs are doing, what the phytochemicals are doing is reducing cellular stress. So they're affecting mitochondrial free radicals and free radicals that damage the cellular DNA and all the parts of the cells. They're protecting the cells from microbes and all of these stress factors. So when we're reducing cellular stress, our nutrient demand goes down. So
Mm.
even though herbs aren't good nutrient sources, they reduce cellular demand for nutrients, so they may do as much or more good than actually replacing the nutrients.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, Dr. Rawls, we're coming up on time, but I do want to ask you one more question at least. And we talked about microbes in this interview, and I'd like to ask you, what are your top two or three, quickly, top two or three best antimicrobial herbs that are safe for everyday people to take?
Yeah. There are some herbs that you hear about that are really good for acute things like elderberry and echinacea. So if you've got an acute viral illness, they're great. But they also stimulate immune system functions, which you don't necessarily want to do chronically. So it's not something you would take for any more than just when you had a flu or a cold. But there are many herbs that you can take on an ongoing basis, looking more at this concept of this reactivation of this dormant microbiome to protect cells. Top of the list is Japanese knotweed. Japanese knotweed is an invasive weed. It's all over the United States. It's a great source of resveratrol, which is what you find in red wine, that age-defying substance. Japanese knotweed is an even better source than wine. But it also has its chemistry is very good for a lot of different kinds of microbes. Cat's claw we use in Lyme disease is also historically used for arthritis, which we're finding a microbe connection, and also was used for cognitive function. So that's a really good one. Good old garlic, great for your heart. It's a great antimicrobial, really wonderful. And one of my favorites is Andrographis. Andrographis is an herb from India that has some really wonderful antiviral and antiprotozoal properties. But when we haven't used that word adaptogen, but an adaptogen is an herb that helps you adapt or helps reinforce your body and protect you from stress. It has a lot of adaptogenic properties too. So those are just a few that I think are just wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Your book is fascinating. I would recommend everybody listening to this show, go get the book, The Cellular Wellness Solution, Tap into Your Full Health Potential with the Science-Backed Power of Herbs. Dr. Rawls, where can people find you online?
Well, several places actually. We have a website called rawlsmd.com that is a good place for people struggling with any kind of chronic illness like Lyme disease or anything else. A lot of great information there. A lot of what I do is creating products and programs through our supplement company, vitalplan.com. And then the just information about the book ongoing is cellularwellness.com.
Okay, great. That's where you can find them, folks. Dr. Rawls, thank you so much for coming to the Anti-Aging Hacks Show.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.